Stop. Listen. Pay attention. Chosen one, this moment is not casual, and you did not arrive here by drifting. Something precise is happening, and you are inside it. You may feel it as fatigue that does not resolve with rest, or pressure that seems to have no single cause. You have carried responsibilities quietly. You have stayed functional while something invisible leaned against you. There is a kind of tired that sleep does not touch, and a kind of focus that feels sharpened by strain. You have been there. You might still be there now. This is not a warning designed to scare you. It is a notice meant to steady you. The urgency here is clean and calm. It asks you to pause, not to panic. You have been moving forward while questions trailed behind you unanswered. You have adapted without applause. You have kept your life running while something inside you asked for explanation, not comfort. Here is the truth you have been circling. What you experienced was not random pressure, and it was not a personal failure to cope better. You crossed through a threshold of intensity that most people never notice until it overwhelms them. You did not dramatize it. You did not collapse. You adjusted and kept going. That matters. You might have wondered why the tension peaked without exploding, why the fear hinted but never took control, why exhaustion hovered but never owned you. You may have told yourself to ignore it, to push through, to be practical. That instinct helped you survive, but it did not explain what happened. This message is not here to flatter you, and it is not here to label you with something mystical. It is here to give you orientation. Clarity is coming, but not all at once. You will understand the pressure without reliving it. You will see the structure without reopening the strain. This is intentional. It is personal. It meets you where you actually are not, where you pretend to be. You are not being summoned to do more. You are being invited to recognize what you already passed through while staying yourself. Stay here. Breathe evenly. Let the noise drop. We will move forward with steadiness, not spectacle. This message is not for everyone who happens to be listening. It is not broad symbolic or open to interpretation. It is for you specifically, because what occurred did not happen around you. It happened through you. You do not need to wonder if you qualify. The very fact that this resonates without effort is the confirmation. You recognize the pressure immediately, not as a story, but as something familiar. That recognition is not curiosity. It is memory. You are being addressed as chosen one here, not as a title to elevate you, but as a functional description. It points to selection by circumstance, not by ego. You were the one present when the intensity arrived. You were the one whose system absorbed it without breaking form. That is not something you trained for consciously. It is something already built into you. What you faced did not ask for your permission. It did not announce itself clearly. It arrived as increased demand, compressed time, quiet isolation, and decisions that carried more weight than they should have. You may have thought you were simply handling a difficult season. In reality, you were demonstrating a level of internal resistance that operates automatically. This is an important distinction. Many people fight pressure with visible effort. You did not. You regulated. You adjusted your pace, your focus, your emotional output without needing to name what was happening. That is not avoidance. That is stability running beneath awareness. You may remember moments where you surprised yourself. You stayed calm when others expected reaction. You remained present when distraction would have been easier. You continued to function while something inside you tracked danger without sounding alarms. This is not denial. It is coherence. This message removes ambiguity because ambiguity keeps you doubting your own experience. You do not need to compare yourself to anyone else to validate this. You do not need external approval. The evidence is internal and already lived. What matters now is understanding the difference between conscious struggle and unconscious stability. Conscious struggle is loud. It announces effort and fatigue. Unconscious stability is quiet. It holds shape under force, without commentary. You operated from the second mode. That is why what happened may feel difficult to explain. There was no dramatic collapse, no visible crisis. And yet something significant passed. You crossed a line of intensity that usually marks people. It did not mark you. This message is here to lock that understanding into place. Not to inflate you, not to burden you, but to remove doubt. What you carried did not attach. What pressed against you did not enter. You remained yourself. And now you are ready to understand why. One symptom stands out when you look back, even if you never named it while it was happening. A strange, sustained tiredness that did not behave like normal exhaustion. Not collapse. Not burnout. Something more precise. You were tired, but you were still clear. Drained, but not disoriented. Pressed, but not panicked. At times, you may have judged yourself for it. You may have wondered why motivation felt flatter, why enthusiasm dimmed without sadness, why your body asked for stillness while your mind stayed alert. You might have called it weakness, stress, or a phase you needed to outgrow. That judgment was understandable, but it was incorrect. That sensation was not a flaw. It was a signal. Your system was not failing. It was reallocating. When pressure increases without becoming visible chaos, the body and mind shift into a conservation pattern. Energy pulls inward. Excess emotion shuts down. Non-essential reactions are muted. This is not collapse behavior. It is containment behavior. You did not lose capacity. You protected it. The reason this confused you is because society teaches only two states: functioning or failing, strong or overwhelmed, productive or burned out. What you experienced lives between those categories, so it often gets mislabeled. The signal was subtle because the threat was subtle. Not dramatic enough to trigger fear, not obvious enough to demand action, just enough to require internal tightening. And your system responded correctly. You may remember moments where you felt slightly detached from noise, from drama, from unnecessary conversation. You were not depressed. You were filtering. Your attention narrowed. Your tolerance for nonsense dropped. Your patience became selective. That is not emotional numbness. That is prioritization under pressure. Your body may have mirrored this. Heavier limbs in the morning. A need for more silence. Less desire to explain yourself. These are not symptoms of decline. They are signs that your internal structure was bearing load. When a bridge carries weight beyond normal traffic, it does not announce distress with sound. It redistributes tension through its supports. That is what you did. Once you understand this, the self-judgment dissolves. You were not lazy. You were not disengaged. You were not secretly breaking. You were stabilizing in real time, without instruction, without drama. This reframing matters because misunderstanding the signal creates unnecessary shame. And shame drains energy that was already being used wisely. What you felt was your system acknowledging transition. Something was moving through your life that required steadiness, not speed. Awareness, not reaction. Silence, not explanation. You did not panic because panic would have been inefficient. You did not shut down because shutdown would have cost too much. You stayed present at a reduced output like a machine idling under load, waiting for pressure to pass. That is intelligence at work beneath consciousness. And this prepares you for the next layer of understanding. Because signals do not appear without cause. They respond to contact. Now that the symptom has been reframed, you are ready to see what applied the pressure. What applied the pressure was not visible in any single event. and that is why it was easy to underestimate. There was no dramatic confrontation, no obvious crisis that demanded a response. Instead, the pressure arrived as convergence. Several subtle demands aligning at once, compressing your internal space without announcing themselves. This is how unseen pressure operates. It does not rush in loudly. It coordinates quietly. You may have noticed that timing felt strange. Situations clustered closer together. Decisions carried more weight than usual. Small responsibilities felt heavier, not because they were larger, but because they arrived without recovery time between them. This was not coincidence. It was structure. The pressure was intentional in its design, but not personal in its malice. It did not target your emotions directly. It tested your regulation. It leaned on your consistency. It watched how you held shape when margins narrowed. What matters is this: you remained functional. You continued to show up. You completed what needed to be done. You maintained coherence in speech, thought, and action. Even when your inner bandwidth was reduced, you did not fragment. That is the key observation. Under coordinated pressure, many people lose sequence. They forget tasks, misjudge tone, react impulsively, or withdraw entirely. You did not. There may have been moments when you felt the edge of that possibility, a sense that one more demand might tip things. But it never happened. You adjusted instead. You simplified. You conserved. You chose not to engage where engagement would cost too much. This was not avoidance. It was calibration. The pressure did not come from one direction. It arrived through time, through expectation, through the subtle demand to remain composed when clarity was incomplete. It asked you to keep moving without full explanation. That is a specific kind of strain, and it reveals internal structure quickly. You did not dramatize it because there was no drama to perform. You did not seek validation because your attention was already occupied with maintaining balance. You did not collapse because collapse was not required. Stability was. This is important to name clearly. You were not resisting something external, you were containing something internal. The pressure did not overwhelm you because it never entered fully. Your system recognized it early and distributed the load. That is why the experience may feel difficult to describe now. Nothing visibly happened yet. Something decisively passed. You crossed through a period where pressure could have disrupted your baseline, and it did not. This is where the phrase you sensed but did not articulate becomes relevant. You crossed a line of intensity, a threshold where many people lose regulation. You stepped over it without ceremony. The pressure receded, not because it was defeated, but because it found no opening. There was nothing to hook into, no instability to amplify, no panic to spread. You stayed intact. And now that the nature of the pressure is visible, it becomes possible to examine how it tested you, point by point without reopening the strain. The pressure did not arrive as a single weight. It expressed itself through several distinct channels, each subtle on its own, but cumulative in effect. Understanding these points matters not to relive them, but to see clearly how you remained regulated through each. The first pressure point was doubt, but not the obvious kind. It did not shout questions at you. It whispered them. Small, persistent uncertainties about timing, direction, or whether your effort was aligned with anything meaningful. You may have noticed thoughts looping without conclusion, not catastrophizing, just unresolved. Many people respond to this by overcorrecting, by seeking reassurance, by forcing decisions prematurely. You did not. You allowed the uncertainty to exist without letting it dictate your behavior. That restraint preserved your stability. The second pressure point was fear, but again, not acute fear. It was ambient, a low-grade sense that something could go wrong without knowing exactly what. This kind of fear often drives hypervigilance or avoidance. You chose neither. You did not scan obsessively for threats, and you did not shut down. You acknowledged the sensation without feeding it. That kept your nervous system from escalating. The third pressure point was energy drain. Your output felt heavier. Tasks required more intention. Rest did not fully replenish you. This is where many people collapse into self-criticism or push themselves into depletion. You did something different. You reduced excess. You conserved where possible. You allowed your pace to slow without interpreting it as failure. That adjustment kept you functional across time, not just in moments. The fourth pressure point was isolation. Not physical loneliness, but experiential isolation. You may have felt that explaining yourself would take too much effort or yield little understanding. So you held more internally. This can be dangerous for some people, leading to withdrawal or resentment. In your case, it became containment. You did not disconnect from reality. You simply limited unnecessary exposure. That preserved clarity. The fifth pressure point was delay. Progress felt stalled or invisible. Outcomes lagged behind effort. This is where frustration usually erupts. You felt the friction, but you did not abandon your structure. You stayed present without forcing resolution. That patience was not passive. It was active regulation. Across all these points, a pattern emerges. You did not fight any of them aggressively. You did not dramatize them. You did not internalize them as identity. You treated them as conditions to be managed, not verdicts to be believed. This is why the experience did not break you. Pressure seeks amplification. It grows when met with reaction, fear, or fragmentation. You offered none of those consistently enough for it to take hold. Instead, you stayed oriented. You adjusted expectations. You simplified inputs. You maintained coherence in small, repeatable actions. That is not accidental. That is internal structure doing its work. This section matters because it demonstrates something quietly important. Your stability was not situational. It was systemic. It did not depend on perfect conditions. It held under imperfect ones. By seeing each pressure point clearly, you remove the lingering question of how you survived it. You did not survive by chance. You stayed regulated because regulation is already native to you. And once this is understood, the experience can be reviewed without mystery, without fear, and without the need to brace for it again. Now comes the moment of review, not as analysis for its own sake, but as confirmation. Looking back with steadiness, you can see that what occurred followed a pattern. It had shape, duration, and resolution. That alone removes the idea that it was random. You can trace when the pressure increased. You can remember the period where your internal resources felt occupied, where attention narrowed, where you operated with less margin, but more precision. You can also notice when it began to ease, not suddenly but gradually, as if something had passed through and moved on. This matters because chance does not behave this way. Coincidence does not apply pressure evenly and then release it once regulation holds. What you experienced responded to your internal coherence. As long as you stayed stable, it had nothing to escalate against. When people explain experiences like this away as luck, they usually do so because they cannot account for internal factors. But you can. Your clarity did not disappear. Your values did not fragment. Your behavior remained consistent. Those are not passive traits. They are active stabilizers. Notice something else. There was no dramatic aftermath, no crash, no emotional fallout, no need to recover from damage. That tells you something important. Whatever crossed your life did not leave residue. It did not penetrate your core. It tested the perimeter and found it intact. This is where understanding replaces doubt. You were not spared because circumstances were easy. You were not carried because someone intervened at the last moment. You remained upright because your internal structure absorbed the force as it was designed to. You may have sensed this intuitively. A quiet recognition that you had been close to something significant without being consumed by it. A sense of having passed a point of no return without drama. That intuition was accurate. What this review confirms is simple and precise. You did not break because there was nothing fragile to exploit. You did not spiral because your inner systems remained synchronized. Thought, emotion, and action stayed aligned even when energy was low. This is not about toughness. It is about coherence. Many people can endure intensity briefly. Fewer can do so without losing themselves. You did not lose sequence. You did not act out of character. You did not abandon your center to manage the outside. By removing explanations based on luck, timing, or coincidence, you give credit where it belongs. To your capacity for self-regulation. To your ability to hold complexity without panic. To your willingness to slow down instead of forcing clarity before it arrived. This review is not meant to dwell on what happened. It is meant to close the loop, to mark the experience as complete and integrated. You are not inside it anymore. You are looking at it from the outside now. And from here, a larger understanding becomes visible. Not everyone can do what you did, not because they are weaker, but because they are built differently. That difference is not about superiority, it is about rarity. When pressure like this appears, most people respond predictably. They accelerate, trying to outrun discomfort. Or they collapse inward, losing structure under the weight. Some externalize, reacting sharply to minor triggers. Others disengage completely. These are common human responses to far less pressure than what you held. You did none of those things. You remained present, not hyper-focused, not detached. Present in a grounded, functional way. You continued to make decisions. You kept relationships intact. You did not burn bridges or retreat into confusion. This alone places your response outside the norm, not because it was dramatic, but because it was stable. This comparison is not meant to elevate you above others. It is meant to clarify contrast. Under similar conditions, many people experience noticeable disruption. Sleep breaks down. Emotions spike. Behavior becomes inconsistent. Even daily routines fracture. You experienced strain, but your life did not unravel. That is uncommon. It is important to say this carefully. Rarity does not imply superiority. It implies design difference. Just as some systems are built for high load and others for flexibility or speed, your internal makeup favors coherence under pressure. That is a neutral fact, not a value judgment. You may have noticed this before in smaller ways. Situations that unsettle others but do not overwhelm you. Moments where you remain steady while others escalate. You may have downplayed this, assuming everyone experiences the world the same way. They do not. Many people require external reassurance to stabilize. You rely on internal alignment. Many need clear explanations before they can function. You continue operating while clarity forms gradually. Many lose presence under uncertainty. You remain available. This does not mean you feel less. It means you regulate more effectively. You process without spilling. You adapt without losing identity. Recognizing this difference matters because misunderstanding it leads to self-minimization. You may have wondered why others seem to struggle more or why you were expected to react differently. You may have questioned whether you were disconnected or indifferent. You were neither, or you were stable. This section exists to normalize that stability without turning it into ego. You are not exceptional in a way that separates you from others. You are uncommon in a way that explains your experience. By seeing the contrast clearly, you remove the temptation to doubt your own perception. You did not imagine the intensity, and you did not exaggerate your response. You simply held more than most would without spectacle. This understanding prepares you for the final clarification. The reason this felt natural is because it did not require activation. It was already there. What you relied on during that period was not a surge of strength that switched on under threat. There was no moment where you had to become someone else to cope. That is the key clarification now. Your steadiness was not activated. It was baseline. This matters because activated strength feels dramatic. It feels effortful. It announces itself internally with adrenaline resolve or a sense of pushing beyond limits. What you experienced was quieter. You did not rise to meet the pressure. The pressure met what was already there. Your internal structure did not need to be assembled in a hurry. It was already assembled. The alignment between how you think, how you feel, and how you act was established long before this moment. That is why you could move through uncertainty without losing yourself. This is not about talent or toughness. It is about maturity of inner systems. Over time, you have developed an ability to stay coherent when inputs are incomplete. You do not require perfect information to remain grounded. You tolerate ambiguity without collapsing into urgency or avoidance. That is a sign of preparation, whether you consciously intended it or not. You may recognize this as a pattern across your life. Situations that ask others to react strongly often ask you to stay steady instead. You are not immune to pressure, but you are oriented toward balance. You do not default to extremes. You adjust incrementally, preserving continuity. There is no need to frame this in supernatural terms. It is structural. Your nervous system, your cognition, and your sense of self are integrated. They communicate efficiently. When pressure increases, they do not compete. They coordinate. This coordination is what allowed you to cross that line of intensity without marking it as trauma. Nothing splintered. Nothing needed to be rebuilt afterward. You did not emerge changed in personality. You emerged confirmed in structure. Understanding this locks your identity gently but firmly. You are someone whose strength does not require performance. You do not need to prove it to access it. You do not need crisis to discover it. It is present in how you live, how you choose, how you remain yourself under load. This clarification is not meant to add responsibility. It removes confusion. You no longer need to ask why you handled that period the way you did. You handled it that way because it matched who you already are. From here, the focus shifts naturally, not toward vigilance, not toward expectation of more pressure, but toward integration. How you carry this awareness forward without changing your balance. That is the final movement of this message. Now the task is not to stay alert for the next test and not to reinterpret your life as a series of threats. That would undo the balance you naturally hold. Integration is quieter than that. It is about allowing what you now understand to settle into how you move forward without changing your rhythm. First, rest needs to be treated as maintenance, not recovery. You are not replenishing damage. You are supporting a system that worked correctly under load. That means choosing rest before exhaustion, not after it. Short pauses, cleaner boundaries around sleep, and moments of mental stillness are not indulgences. They are alignment practices. Second, discernment becomes more important than effort. You do not need to do more to honor what you carried. You need to be more selective. Notice where your attention naturally sharpens and where it dulls. Follow that information. It tells you what is essential and what is noise. You are allowed to disengage from what drains without explanation. Third, boundaries should remain simple and unemotional. You do not need to justify them or defend them. If something costs more, then it gives you step back. If a conversation destabilizes your pace, you limit it. This is not withdrawal. It is conservation of coherence. Fourth, patience returns to its proper place, not as waiting without movement, but as allowing timing to reveal itself. You have already proven that you can function without immediate clarity. There is no urgency to force conclusions now. Let decisions mature. Let outcomes arrive. You do not need to lean into the future. It will meet you. Fifth, focus narrows naturally when you trust your baseline. You do not need to scan for problems or replay what happened. Your system already knows how to adjust. Give it stable routines, honest inputs, and space to recalibrate. That is enough. If there is a sixth perspective to hold, it is this. Balance is not something you must protect aggressively. It is something you maintain by not overreacting to understanding. You do not need to become more serious, more guarded, or more intense because of what you realized. You are allowed to remain ordinary in behavior while being precise internally. This is how integration works. Nothing dramatic changes on the outside. Your life does not need a new narrative. You simply stop doubting the steadiness that carried you through. You stop mislabeling it. You stop bracing for it to fail. Awareness settles into the background where it belongs. It informs your choices without dominating them. It gives you confidence without performance. It closes the experience instead of keeping it open. You are not on watch. You are not preparing for another crossing. You already crossed what needed to be crossed. What remains now is calm continuation. Take a moment now and let everything settle. You are not standing at the edge of something dangerous. You are standing on stable ground, looking back with understanding instead of tension. What matters most is this simple realization. You moved through an intensity that could have disrupted you, and it did not. Not because you forced strength, not because you denied reality, but because your inner structure held. That realization does not demand excitement. It brings reassurance. You are not fragile in the way you may have feared. You are not one step away from losing balance. What you carry is steady enough to remain intact even when circumstances tighten. That knowledge should soften you, not harden you. There is nothing you need to fix about yourself after this. Nothing you need to prove. Nothing you need to watch for obsessively. The experience is complete. It does not follow you forward as a threat. It stays behind you as information. If you want words to hold on to, let them be simple. You can say to yourself quietly and without ceremony, I stayed present. I stayed myself. I remember who I am. Those are not affirmations meant to hype you up. They are acknowledgments of fact. If this message met you accurately, leave a comment with the word I remember or the number 777. Not for visibility, for your own mark of recognition. If you want to continue exploring this kind of clarity, subscribe and stay with this channel. The next message will meet you from the same grounded place without urgency, without fear. You do not need to rush anywhere from here. You do not need to brace yourself. You crossed what needed to be crossed, and you are still here, intact, aware, and steady.